The silence on the bridge of the T. So, Nyx was not an absence of sound, but a presence of discipline. It was a coiled spring, a held breath stretching across the seconds as Fleet Captain Eva Rostova stood before the forward canopy, her gaze fixed on the stellar void. Outside, nothing but the indifferent glitter of distant stars and the faint, ghostly smear of the Ethelberg Nebula. To any conventional sensor sweep, they were just another pocket of empty space, a harmless distortion in the cosmic background radiation. But here, within the cloaked hulls of the 3rd Terran Retribution Fleet, 36 ships hung like ghosts, waiting for a dawn that would only bring fire. Rostova's reflection stared back from the armored crystal, a woman whose youth was betrayed by the stark severity in her eyes. A look forged in the border skirmishes the Vex Imperium had always dismissed as pirate actions. She ran a gauntleted thumb over the seam of her glove, the only sign of the tension thrumming just beneath her skin. The Vex thought of humanity as scattered, primitive upstarts, a minor species clinging to a single star system, notable only for their stubborn refusal to accept the gift of subsumption into the Imperium's grand design. They had delivered their final offer, the Treaty of Subsumption, with the condescending patience of a gardener offering a weed a place in the conservatory. It was a document of surrender masquerading as an invitation, promising peace and protection in exchange for absolute economic and cultural assimilation. Terran High Command had responded with 2 words, tribute rendered, a message that, until this exact moment, the Vex had not understood. On the main holotable, the Ethelberg array was rendered in shimmering blue light, a massive, sprawling starbase that served as the primary logistics and communications hub for the Imperium's entire Outer Rim command. It was a symbol of Vex power, a testament to their engineering and their undisputed dominion over this quadrant of the galaxy. It was also, as of now, completely blind. Rostova's voice was low, cutting through the quiet hum of the life support systems. Commander Varric, final confirmation. Are their deep-range comms still dark? Her XO, a hulking man with a beard prematurely salted with gray, nodded without looking away from his console. Affirmative, Captain. Our infiltrator drones have fully decoupled their primary relay. They can scream for help, but no one will hear them for at least 37 standard minutes. The first wave of their patrol fleet is still 2 hours out on its standard rotation. 37 minutes. An eternity and no time at all. Humanity had spent 50 years preparing for this moment, feigning weakness and compliance while secretly building a new kind of fleet, a new kind of doctrine. The Scythe Doctrine wasn't about glorious fleet engagements or honorable duels between capital ships. It was about decapitation. It was about finding the enemy's spine and severing it before they even knew they were in a fight. Rostova turned from the canopy, her boots making no sound on the deck plating. She surveyed her crew, a tapestry of quiet competence. Each officer was a veteran of the so-called Pirate Wars, each carrying scars from Vex proxy forces. They didn't need a speech. They all knew the stakes. They had all read the Treaty of Subsumption, had seen the veiled threat of annihilation that lay beneath its flowery prose. They knew that if they failed here, the Vex war fleets would descend upon Earth not with an invitation, but with planet crackers. All flotillas. Rostova's voice was now broadcast across the fleet, cold and clear as the void itself. Decloak on my mark. Scythe protocol is in effect. Target priorities are the primary power conduits. the shipyard docking clamps, and the command spire. I want that station gutted, not captured. No broadside engagements. We are the ghosts they never saw coming. Mark. The countdown appeared on her command throne's display. A silent, stark 5, 4, 3. Praetor Valerius of the Vex Imperium was enjoying a glass of Calaxian nectar, savoring its sweet, lingering burn as he gazed out of his command spire's viewport at the majestic sweep of the Ethelberg array. The station was his domain, a perfect, intricate machine of imperial power. He had just reviewed the morning reports. The Terran primitives had formally rejected the treaty. Predictable. Their petulant defiance was a minor annoyance, a problem that would be corrected in due time. The Praetor had already drafted the punitive fleet orders, a show of force that would bring the stubborn apes to heel. He swirled the amber liquid, musing on the satisfaction of watching their ragged little ships burn. That was when the universe outside his window tore itself apart. It wasn't an explosion of light and sound, but an unnerving ripple, as if space itself was shrugging off a disguise. 36 slivers of absolute black appeared where there had been nothing, their hulls absorbing the light of the nearby nebula, making them appear like holes punched in reality. For a half second, an eternity of confusion, Valerius simply stared. There were no energy signatures, no warp space exit flares, no herald of their arrival. They were simply there. Then the silence broke, not with the roar of plasma cannons or the scream of missiles, but with a storm of silent, kinetic death. Thousands of hypervelocity tungsten rods, launched from the Terran ships, crossed the distance to the array in the space of a heartbeat. They struck with surgical precision. The array's defensive gun batteries, still cycling into active mode, were shredded before they could fire a single shot. Power conduits the size of buildings erupted in silent, brilliant blue flashes as the rods pierced their armor and vaporized their contents. The massive docking clamps holding 3 Vex destroyers for resupply were severed, sending the warships tumbling helplessly into the station's superstructure. Alarms blared across the spire, a cacophony of panicked noise that shattered the Praetor's calm. "Report," he roared, spilling his drink. "What is happening? Who is attacking us?" A tactical officer, his scaled face pale with shock, stammered, "Sensors can't get a lock." "Praetor, they're running cold. Minimal energy output. Primitive projectile weapons. But the velocity is impossible." The Terran ships, phantoms as their crews called them, moved with a predator's grace. They didn't form a battle line. They scattered, weaving between the station's sprawling arms, their point defense cannons spitting streams of molten metal at any Vex fighter craft that managed to launch. They ignored the crippled destroyers, focusing their fire with chilling discipline on the station's vital organs. This wasn't a battle. It was a vivisection. Aboard the Nyx, Rostova watched the unfolding chaos with an unnerving calm. "Hades Wing, deploy. Your target is the primary fuel depot. I want a chain reaction that will cripple their entire portside industrial complex." As assault frigates peeled off to execute her order, another set of signatures appeared on the hollow table. "Boarding pods have launched," Varric announced, his voice tight with anticipation. "Marines are on their way to the command spire's comms hub." Sergeant Marcus Thorne and his squad were encased in darkness and the violent shudder of atmospheric entry. Their boarding pod, the Fist of Karen, was a brutal piece of engineering designed for a single purpose: to punch through a capital ship's hull. The impact was deafening, A shriek of tortured metal followed by a bone-jarring slam. The forward hatch blew inwards, and Thorn was the first one through, his pulse rifle already scanning the smoke-filled corridor. Go, 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 check your corners. We have 2 minutes to plant the repeater, and get out. The Vex guards, bred for obedience and garrison duty, were not prepared for this. They were used to posturing, to overwhelming force, not to this kind of savage, close quarters efficiency. Thorn's squad moved like a single organism, a blur of gray combat armor and disciplined violence. They didn't shout war cries. They communicated in terse, coded bursts. A Vex soldier would round a corner and be met with a triple tap of pulse fire before they could even raise their weapon. The Terran Marines were not there to fight an army. They were there to sever a nerve. They reached the comms hub, a vast chamber filled with humming consoles, and planted their device a data worm that would not just jam Vex communications, but actively feed them corrupted, phantom intelligence for the next 48 hours, turning their entire command structure into a house of mirrors. As they fought their way back to the extraction point, the Ethelberg array was dying around them. Explosions blossomed along its spine as the fuel depots cooked off in a spectacular, silent chain reaction. The station's artificial gravity began to fail, sending debris and bodies tumbling through the corridors. Praetor Valerius stood on his shattered bridge, watching his command, his world, come undone. The Terran ships were pulling back now, their work done, melting back into the void as silently as they had appeared. Only one ship remained, larger than the others, its black hull a stark silhouette against the fires of his dying station. It hailed him, his comms officer. Against all odds, managed to put the transmission on the main screen. The face that appeared was human, female, and utterly devoid of emotion. Her eyes were chips of ice. Praetor Valerius, Fleet Captain Eva Rostova said, her voice echoing in the ruined spire. This is Fleet Captain Rostova of the Terran System's sovereignty. We have received your treaty of subsumption. She paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the air, thick with the smell of ozone and burnt circuits. Consider this our counteroffer. The transmission cut out. Then, from the bow of the Nyx, 2 massive spinal rail cannons fired. The projectiles were invisible to the naked eye, but their impact was absolute. The command spire, the very symbol of Vex authority in the sector, was vaporized in a flash of incandescent light. As the Nyx turned to follow its fleet into the dark, Rostova allowed herself a single, deep breath. The first blow had been struck. The Imperium had been bloodied, its arrogance shattered. But she felt no triumph, only the crushing weight of the coming storm. She knew the Vex. They would not take this insult lying down. They would respond not with treaties, but with a tide of fire and steel that would threaten to scour humanity from the stars. This wasn't a victory. It was merely the first sentence in a declaration of total war. She keyed the encrypted channel to Sol High Command, her message as brief and brutal as the battle itself. Tribute rendered. The news of Ethelberg's fall did not arrive at the Vex Imperium's throne world of Vexia as a clean report, but as a disease. Sergeant Thorn's data worm had done its work with insidious perfection, and for 3 full cycles, the Outer Rim Command's data stream became a torrent of lies. Phantom Terran fleets were reported striking systems hundreds of light years apart. Ghostly distress calls echoed from colonies that were, in fact, perfectly safe. The Imperium's vast, ponderous military machine, built for overwhelming frontal assaults, was paralyzed by 1,000 phantom cuts. In the Obsidian Citadel, the Council of Praetors descended into acrimonious debate, their voices sharp with fear and outrage. They saw the work of a vast, coordinated enemy, a galactic conspiracy rising against them, never once suspecting the truth that the architect of their chaos was a single, cloaked fleet of 36 ships. Only one being in the chamber remained silent. Kalen Vor, Grand Kalen of the Crimson Legion, was not a praetor. He was a warrior, a relic from the Unification Wars, his scaled hide a tapestry of scars earned in battles the political class preferred to forget. He listened to the babble of phantom fleets and feigned invasions, and in the chaos, he saw a pattern. It was the pattern of a predator drawing the herd's attention with noise and movement, all to disguise the single, lethal strike from the shadows. He rose, his immense frame casting a long shadow over the council table, and the room fell silent. "You are being blinded by ghosts." Vor's voice was a low growl, like grinding stone. "There is no grand alliance. There is only one enemy, an enemy who has struck our heart while making us chase shadows in the periphery. They are clever, more clever than we ever credited." He activated the central holotable, dismissing the corrupted tactical displays. With a few swift gestures, he isolated the Ethelberg system, highlighting the communications blackout, the sudden cessation of all shipping reports, the unnatural silence. "This is where the real wound is," he stated, his clawed finger tapping the dead system. "While you have been diverting the legions to defend empty worlds from imaginary fleets, the true enemy has slipped a knife between our ribs and vanished. They think we are fools." A nervous praetor shifted. "What do you propose?" Grand Kalen Vor's eyes, chips of obsidian, seemed to burn. "I propose we stop listening to the ghosts. I will take the Crimson Legion. We will not follow their false trails. We will find their hunting ground, and we will burn it. We will hunt the hunters." Meanwhile, the Third Terran Retribution Fleet was a wraith moving through the back lanes of Vex space. Rostova had not withdrawn after Ethelberg. The Scythe Doctrine demanded momentum. To stop was to be found. To be found was to die. For 20 days, they became the myth the data worm had invented, a specter of vengeance falling upon the Imperium's soft underbelly. They moved with a chilling tempo, a rhythm of violence that left no time for recovery. They materialized from the dark to obliterate a convoy of fuel tankers in the Zephyr Passage, plunging an entire Vex subsector into a logistics nightmare. They jumped to the isolated moon of Cygnus X1, where Sergeant Thorne and his Marines boarded and destroyed a deep space listening post, blinding Vex intelligence in the region for a month. They did not linger for glorious ship-to-ship combat. They were reapers, their work done in minutes, leaving only wreckage and silence before melting back into the void. On the bridge of the Nyx, a strange, tense fatigue was setting in. The crew moved with the sharp efficiency of professionals, but their eyes were hollowed, their faces pale under the recycled light. They were winning, but it was a victory measured in sleepless nights and the constant, gnawing tension of being a handful of wolves in a land of lions. "Another successful strike, Captain," Commander Varric reported, his voice flat. "The supply depot at Omicron is slag, But the Vex are adapting. Their patrol patterns are becoming more erratic, less predictable. They're starting to think like prey. Rostova stood before the star chart, tracing the projected path of a Vex relief fleet. "It's because they're scared," she said, though her voice held no satisfaction. "Fear breeds desperation. Desperation makes them dangerous." She knew the clock was ticking. Their stealth was their shield. But every strike, every destroyed convoy, was another breadcrumb leading back to them. They were deep in hostile territory. Their own supply lines stretched to the breaking point, their crews running on adrenaline and caffeine. The order for the next mission came down to Sergeant Thorne's squad in the cramped, metallic confines of the Nix's Marine Deployment Bay. They were cleaning their weapons. The ritualistic clicks and clacks of assembly, the only sound over the low hum of the ship's inertial dampeners. They had lost a man at the Cygnus outpost, a rookie named Jensen, caught by a stray plasma burst. The loss had settled over the squad like a shroud, a stark reminder that their phantom-like status did not make them immortal. Thorne was checking the charge on his pulse rifle when the mission slate lit up on the bay wall. Their target was the Viridian shipyards, a primary Vex naval construction facility. It was a target of opportunity, a prize so great it bordered on madness. According to the latest intel spliced together from intercepted Vex transmissions and probe droids, the system's formidable defense fleet, the 17th Armada, had been drawn away on a fool's errand, chasing one of the data worm's phantom Terran signals. Viridian was, for a narrow window of time, almost completely undefended. The objective for Thorne's team was brutally ambitious: board the primary orbital command station, fight their way to the shipyard's master control, and trigger a cascading overload in the half-finished cruisers docked in their cradles. They were to turn the Imperium's newest weapons against themselves. A Marine, a woman named Gia, let out a low whistle. "That's not a raid, Sarge. That's kicking in the front door of the armory and trying to burn it down with a match." Thorne finished slotting his rifle's power cell into place, the click echoing with finality. "We're the match," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Now check your gear. We launch in 20. Aboard the Nix's bridge, the same tension was palpable. Varric stood beside Rostova, his brow furrowed as he stared at the tactical display of the Viridian system. "It's too perfect." "Ava," he said, using her first name, something he only did when his concern overrode protocol. A primary shipyard left unguarded, the Vex are arrogant. But they aren't fools. This feels like bait. Rostova's gaze was fixed on the prize. The chance to cripple the Vex's starship production in this sector for years was too significant to ignore. If they succeeded, it would be a blow even more devastating than Ethelberg. It would shift the entire strategic balance of the war. "The intel is solid," she countered, though a sliver of doubt pricked at her. "Our probes confirm the 17th Armada is 2 systems away and moving in the wrong direction. We will be in and out before they can even process the recall order." She straightened, her command persona locking back into place. "The risk is acceptable for the reward. The Scythe doctrine is about exploiting weakness. This is the ultimate weakness." She gave the order. "All flotillas, prepare for jump to the Viridian system. On my mark," as the 36 Terran ships tore open reality and plunged into warp space. Kalen Vor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Indomitus, a vessel black as a funeral shroud and twice as grim. His Crimson Legion was not in orbit around Viridian. They were spread out in a silent, predatory sphere at the system's edge, cloaked with forgotten technology from the Unification Wars, their engines cold, their weapon ports sealed, waiting. Vor had not been fooled by the phantom signal that had drawn the 17th Armada away. In fact, he had amplified it, ensuring the local fleet would be far enough away not to interfere. He had studied the Terrans' attack patterns, their preference for decapitation strikes on high-value, under-defended targets. He knew they would not be able to resist the lure of a naked shipyard. He had sacrificed the bait. Now, he waited for the trap to spring. The third Terran Retribution Fleet emerged from warp space into the cold, silent reality of the Viridian system. Everything was exactly as the intel had predicted. The system was quiet. The massive, skeletal frames of the shipyard hung in orbit around the green marbled planet, attended by a swarm of tiny worker drones. No defense fleet, no picket ships. Only the prize. No Vex patrols detected. Captain, Varric reported, a note of disbelief in his voice. The system is clear. Rusova allowed a flicker of grim satisfaction. Begin approach. Hades Wing. You have weapons free on the orbital defense platforms. All other ships, maintain formation. Sergeant Thorne, you are cleared to launch. The boarding pod streaked away from the Nyx, fiery needles aimed at the heart of the command station. The Terran fleet advanced, confident, a pack of wolves closing in on a tethered goat. They were less than 100,000 kilometers from the shipyards when the universe came alive with malice. Warp signatures bloomed on every sensor, not in one location, but in a 360-degree sphere, boxing them in completely. Dozens. Then scores of Vex warships materialized from the void, their crimson running lights painting the hulls of the Terran Phantoms in a bloody glow. They were not patrol ships. They were heavy cruisers, battleships, and at their center, the monstrous form of the Indomitus. On the bridge of the Nyx, the calm shattered. Alarms shrieked as the tactical display turned from a clean blue to a sea of hostile red contacts. Ambush, Varric yelled, stating the horrifyingly obvious. Fleet-wide energy spikes, they're powering main weapons. Rostova stood frozen for a single, heart-stopping second, the enormity of her miscalculation crashing down on her. The bait had been taken. The trap had been sprung. She looked out the forward canopy to see the sky filled with Vex battle lines, their gun ports opening like 1,000 hungry mouths. Her voice, when she spoke, was laced with a chilling resolve, the voice of a cornered animal preparing to fight to the death. "All ships," she commanded, her words cutting through the rising panic. "Engage." There was no negotiation, no warning shot. The universe simply erupted in a symphony of directed energy. Kalen Vor's Crimson Legion fired as one, a coordinated alpha strike of such overwhelming power that it defied comprehension. Beams of pure particle energy, lances of coherent gravitons, and swarms of plasma torpedoes converged on the boxed-in Terran fleet from every conceivable angle. The T.S. Vigilance, a Phantom-class frigate, simply ceased to exist, its void black hull blossoming into a brief, incandescent flower of vaporized metal and vented plasma. The Dauntless and the Stalwart, two heavy destroyers, saw their kinetic barriers overload in the same instant, their spines snapping under the brutal and focused fire. On the bridge of the Nyx, the world became a cacophony of damage reports and the violent shudder of impacts. Red lights strobed across the deck as secondary shields flared and died. Port side armor is buckling. Drive cone 2 is offline. An officer screamed over the din. Rostova gripped the arms of her command throne, her knuckles white, her body rigid against the artificial gravity's struggle to compensate. The scythe doctrine was dead. Stealth, precision, decapitation. Those were luxuries for a predator. They were now prey, and the time for cleverness was over. The time for savagery had begun. All ships, her voice cut through the chaos, not with panic, but with the cold fury of a cornered wolf. Disregard scythe protocol. Execute emergency edict maelstrom. All fire. All batteries. On the shipyard itself. Target the fusion cores of those unfinished cruisers. Burn it. Burn it all. Commander Varric stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. Captain, that's our only potential cover. If we destroy it, it is also our only weapon. She snapped back, her eyes blazing. We cannot outfight them, and we cannot outrun them. But we can make a ghost so large, it will blind them long enough for us to slip through the cracks. We will turn their armory into our escape route. On the bridge of the Indomitus, Kalen Vor watched the unfolding battle with a predator's satisfaction. The initial volley had been devastating, shattering the Terran formation. He expected them to scatter, to break and run, making them easy to pick off one by one. But they didn't. To his astonishment, the surviving Terran ships turned their guns away from his legion. They ignored his cruisers, his battleships, and focused their entire remaining firepower on the Viridian shipyards. Torpedoes and hypervelocity slugs that should have been aimed at his fleet slammed into the skeletal superstructures of the half-built Vex dreadnoughts. "What are they doing?" his tactical officer hissed. "They are destroying the objective. It's madness." Vor's eyes narrowed. No, this was not madness. This was something else. Something he had not anticipated. It was desperation forged into a weapon. They were not trying to win. They were trying to dictate the terms of their own destruction. Sergeant Thorne and his squad were thrown against the corridor walls as their target. The orbital command station was rocked by a series of massive explosions. The lights flickered and died, replaced by the terrifying red glow of emergency warnings. The Vex guards they had been methodically eliminating were suddenly a secondary concern. The station itself was coming apart. "Sarge, what the hell is going on?" Gia yelled, her voice strained over the comms. "Our own fleet is firing on us." Thorne slammed a fresh power cell into his rifle, his mind racing. He saw it in an instant, the horrifying, brilliant logic of Rostova's command. They were a lost cause, a sacrificial pawn in a much larger, more desperate game. Their original mission was obsolete. A new one had just been issued by the cannons of their own fleet. "Change of plans," he barked, his voice cutting through the squad's confusion. "We're not just overloading the docked ships. We're going for the station's primary reactor. We're not escaping. We're the fuse." A grim silence answered him. Every Marine understood. There would be no extraction. The Fist of Karen was a tomb, and their only purpose now was to make their deaths count. With a renewed, fatalistic purpose, they pushed deeper into the dying station, fighting through panicked Vex crew and collapsing corridors. Their battle was no longer one of sabotage, but a race to the station's heart before it was torn apart by friendly fire. The space between the Terran fleet and the Crimson Legion became a slaughterhouse. For every Vex cruiser the Terrans managed to cripple with a lucky shot, 2 more of their own ships were gutted. The Nyx itself was a wounded beast. Its port side a lattice work of scorched and twisted metal. It flew on impulse thrusters alone, its main drive a ruin. Rostova stood on her bridge, a grim conductor orchestrating a symphony of destruction. She was sacrificing her ships, ordering them to concentrate fire on specific structural weaknesses in the shipyard, creating a chain reaction she had mapped in her mind in the seconds after the ambush was sprung. "Hades Wing, what is left of you?" she broadcasted, her voice strained but unbroken. "Full power to your forward shields. You are our battering ram. Punch a hole toward the primary shipyard spire. The rest of the fleet will follow your wake." It was a suicide order, and everyone knew it. The 4 remaining frigates of Hades Wing acknowledged without hesitation, their engines flaring to a suicidal brightness as they charged directly into the thickest of the Vex fire, their hulls absorbing a storm of energy to clear a path for the ships behind them. They lasted for 90 seconds, a brief, heroic flare of defiance before they were annihilated, but it was enough. The core of the Terran fleet, led by the battered Nyx, surged into the cleared path, plunging directly into the growing inferno of the self-destructing shipyard. Thorn's squad reached the primary reactor chamber just as the station's containment fields began to fail. The room was a cathedral of humming machinery, bathed in the blue-white light of a captive star. A handful of Vex engineers were frantically trying to initiate a shutdown, but they were no match for a squad of Terran Marines on their final mission. The firefight was short and brutal. As the last Vex fell, Thorn slammed his demolition charges onto the primary coolant regulator. "Gia, rig the secondary conduit. Everyone else, give me covering fire on that entrance." He roared over the rising scream of the uncontained reactor. The station groaned around them, the final death rattle of a giant. Gia slapped her own charges into place. "It's rigged, Sarge," she yelled back. "Timer is linked to yours." Thorn looked at the faces of his surviving Marines, 4 of them left, their armor scorched, their expressions grim but resolute. He gave a single, sharp nod. "It's been an honor," he said into the squad comm. He armed the charges. Aboard the Indomitus, Vor watched as the Terran ships dove headlong into the exploding shipyard. He saw the suicide run of their frigates, the chilling discipline of their formation, even as they were being torn apart. He saw a level of coordinated sacrifice he had not witnessed since the darkest days of the Unification Wars. They are trying to use the reactor cascade as cover. He growled, a flicker of grudging respect warring with his frustration. "All ships, forward batteries. I want that shipyard turned to incandescent gas before they can—" He was cut off by a flash of light so brilliant it overloaded every forward sensor on his flagship. The Viridian Orbital Command Station did not just explode. It detonated with the force of a small nova. Thorn's charges, combined with the unstable reactors of the half-finished dreadnoughts and the tons of volatile fuel and munitions, turned the entire shipyard into a man-made sun. The shockwave, a roiling, expanding sphere of pure energy and vaporized matter, slammed into the Vex fleet. Shields on the forward line of the Crimson Legion flickered and died. Smaller cruisers were sent tumbling, their systems fried. The meticulously planned Vex formation was shattered by the sheer, raw power of the blast. When the sensors on the Indomitus cleared, the heart of the Viridian system was a glowing, expanding nebula of debris. And through the heart of that chaos, 9 battered, heavily damaged Terran ships were burning away at maximum possible speed. A handful of ghosts escaping from the heart of a sun they themselves had created. The rest of the 3rd Terran Retribution Fleet was gone, consumed by the fire. Kalen Vor stared at the empty void where his perfect trap had been, his fists clenching so hard his claws dug into his palms. He had won the battle. He had destroyed 27 enemy warships, but 9 had escaped, and in their desperate, suicidal defiance, the Terrans had taught him a terrible lesson. They were not just clever, they were unbreakable. His hunt was not over. It had just truly begun. For the 9 surviving ships of the 3rd Terran Retribution Fleet, the escape from Viridian was not a flight to safety, but a descent into a different kind of hell. They were ghosts in a graveyard of their own making, running on crippled engines, bleeding atmosphere, and leaving a trail of debris that made their already compromised stealth utterly useless. The shockwave of the shipyard's destruction had been their salvation and their damnation, a chaotic screen that had allowed them to break through the Crimson Legion's cordon, but it had also brutalized their already damaged ships. The T.S.S. Nyx was a testament to survival. Its port side was a mangled ruin, entire sections open to the void. Its FTL drive was a sputtering, unreliable wreck, capable of only short, violent skips through warp space jumps that were as likely to tear the ship apart as they were to move it. On the bridge, the disciplined silence had been replaced by the weary, frantic hum of damage control. Medics moved through the dim, emergency-lit space, tending to the wounded. Engineers, their faces smeared with grime and exhaustion, were hot-wiring secondary systems just to keep the life support from failing. Fleet Captain Rostova stood at the holotable, which flickered and distorted, displaying a star chart riddled with static. She was no longer a fleet captain. She was the commander of a ragged flotilla of cripples, 27 ships, thousands of men and women, including Sergeant Thorne and his entire Marine contingent, were gone. The weight of that loss was a physical presence on the bridge, heavier than any armor. Yet, there was no time for grief. Kalen Vor would be hunting them. He was not a politician. He would not be deterred by the loss of a shipyard. He would see their escape as a personal insult, a challenge to his warrior's pride. Status: Commander. Rostova's voice was hoarse, stripped of its former icy command, now just raw and tired. Varric, a fresh plasma burn stitched across his cheek, looked up from a sputtering console. Of the 9 ships that made it out, 2 are dead in space. The Arbiter and the Revenant. Their reactors are critical. We're picking up their life pods now. The other 7 of us, we're all critical in some way. The Nyx is the only ship with even a semi-functional FTL drive, and it's a miracle it's holding together at all. He paused, his gaze meeting hers. We can't outrun him. Ava, we're too slow, too damaged. He'll find our trail within the cycle. Rostova stared at the map, at the vast, empty expanse of hostile Vex space that lay between them and the nearest neutral territory. Varric was right. A conventional retreat was impossible. They were wounded animals, and the Alpha Predator was closing in. Her mind, honed by years of asymmetrical warfare, began to work, sifting through the wreckage of her defeat for a new weapon. If we cannot run, she said, her voice slowly regaining a sliver of its old steel, then we will hide, and if we cannot hide, we will become a monster so frightening that even the hunter will hesitate to approach. Her plan was born of pure, distilled desperation. She transmitted it to the other 6 surviving captains, her voice a low, grim whisper across the comms. They would not try to run for home. Instead, they would limp to the Charybdis Maw, a notorious, chaotic asteroid field thick with stellar radiation, sensor ghosts, and navigational hazards. It was a place sane captains avoided, a shipbreaker's yard where pirates and smugglers went to disappear. But its chaos would be their shield, a place to mask their energy signatures and make repairs. And while they hid, they would begin a new phase of the war. They would become the ghosts that Kalen Vor had accused them of being. Rostova ordered the two crippled ships, the Arbiter and the Revenant, to be stripped of every functional weapon, every spare part, and every drop of fuel. Their remaining crews, packed into the fleet's life pods, would begin a long, slow drift towards a prearranged dead drop point, broadcasting a repeating, low-powered distress signal, a decoy to lead the Crimson Legion on a chase. The remaining 7 ships, meanwhile, would transform. They would cannibalize the stripped vessels and each other, becoming something new. Rostova's engineers, guided by her ruthless new vision, began refitting the ships. They jury-rigged the salvaged rail cannons from the dead ships onto the hulls of the living, turning their destroyers into bristling, ugly gun platforms that sacrifice speed for overwhelming forward firepower. They took the FTL drive from the Nix and, in a feat of desperate brilliant engineering, created a portable, external FTL buoy. The 7 ships would be tethered to it, slaves to a single, shared engine. They would jump together, or not at all. They were no longer a flotilla. They were a single entity, a 7-headed hydra, slow and monstrous, a beast designed not to flee, but to haunt. Kalen Vor found the wreckage of the Arbiter and the Revenant 2 days later. The ships were cold, dead husks, picked clean like carcasses. His tactical officers pointed to the trail of the life pods, a clear vector leading deeper into Vex space. It was the obvious trail, the logical one for a defeated enemy. But Vor was not a logical commander. He was an instinctual one. He had felt the Terran's defiance at Viridian, the sheer, suicidal will behind their actions. This felt too simple, too defeated. "It is a lie," he growled, standing on the bridge of the Indomitus. "This is the trail of a rabbit, meant to distract us from the wolf." He turned to his sensor chief. "Scan for residual FTL traces. Not the strong signatures of a fleet in retreat, but the faint, dirty radiation of a damaged drive, a drive leaking energy like a wounded animal." It took 12 hours, but they found it. A faint, chaotic trail of exotic particles, leading not towards Terran space, but away from it, towards the chaotic, swirling hell of the Charybdis Maw. A cruel smile spread across Kalen Vor's face. The wolves were hiding in the briar patch. "Set a course," he commanded. The hunt continues. Within the Charybdis Maw, the 7 Terran ships drifted like sharks in murky water. Their hulls were now a patchwork of scavenged plates and external conduits. Their profiles were jagged, wrong. They looked like pirate ships, like specters. Rostova had her crew working in relentless shifts, repairing what they could, rearming what they couldn't repair. She pushed them to the brink of exhaustion, her own gaunt face a reflection of their collective weariness. Their new doctrine was simple. They were now a trap. They would move slowly, clumsily, from asteroid to asteroid, their shared FTL buoy a beacon of weakness. They would appear on Vex long-range sensors as a cluster of crippled, easy targets, a convoy of survivors waiting to be finished off. They would bait the hook with their own apparent vulnerability. The first Vex patrol fleet to find them was a squadron of 3 fast attack cruisers. Arrogant and overconfident, they saw the cluster of damaged ships on their scopes and moved in for an easy kill, broadcasting taunts over open channels. They closed to weapons range, ready to vaporize the pathetic Terran remnants. That was when the trap sprang. At Rostova's command, the 7 Terran ships, which had been drifting with minimal power, vented their core plasma into the surrounding nebula of radioactive dust. The sudden massive energy bloom blinded the Vex sensors for 3 critical seconds. In that window of blindness, the 7 ships pivoted as one, their newly mounted, oversized rail cannons already charged. They fired a single, coordinated volley. 30 hypervelocity slugs, a solid wall of kinetic death, slammed into the lead Vex cruiser before its crew even knew they were under attack. The ship's shields shattered. Its hull was punctured in a dozen places, and its reactor went critical in a silent, blinding flash. The other 2 Vex cruisers, their sensors clearing to the site of their lead ship's annihilation, broke formation in panic. It was a fatal mistake. Rostova's Hydra did not give chase. It simply pivoted again, the movements of the 7 ships perfectly synchronized, and fired another volley, gutting one cruiser and crippling the other. The battle was over in less than a minute. There were no survivors. On the bridge of the Nyx, there were no cheers. There was only the grim satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. They had killed, and they had survived. They were no longer the 3rd Retribution Fleet. Varric, looking at the tactical display showing the fresh Vex wreckage, gave them their new name. "We're the Wreckers," he said, his voice a low murmur. "We're all that's left, hiding in a graveyard, pretending to be ghosts." Rostova looked at the single Vex ship they had left crippled but alive, its distress beacon now screaming into the void. "Let them scream," she said, her voice cold as the space between worlds. "Let them tell Kalen Vor what they found here. We are not ghosts. We are the monster that waits in the dark." The crippled Vex ship was the new bait, and Rostova knew, with absolute certainty, that the Grand Kalen of the Crimson Legion would not be able to resist it. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The silence in the Charybdis Maw was a living thing, a predatory stillness that pressed in on the hull of the T. Nyx. For 3 days, the 7 ships of the Wreckers drifted in the shadow of a colossal, iron-rich asteroid, listening to the repeating distress call of the crippled Vex cruiser they had left as bait. It was a lonely, maddening sound, a digital ghost crying in the wilderness. On the bridge, every crew member was at their post, the air thick with a tension that was part exhaustion, part dread, and part a razor-sharp, fatalistic focus. They were the bait now, too, waiting for the Leviathan to rise from the deep. Commander Varric stood beside Rostova, his eyes fixed on the tactical display, which showed nothing but the swirling, chaotic sensor returns of the Maw. "He's coming. Ava," he said, his voice a low rumble. "He's too proud, too much of a predator to ignore this. He won't just send another patrol." Rostova didn't look at him. Her gaze was directed out of the forward canopy at the field of tumbling rock and ice. Over the past 3 days, her engineers and tactical teams had performed a miracle of brutal improvisation. Using remote drones, they had attached the salvaged impulse engines from the Arbiter and the Revenant to a dozen of the largest asteroids in their immediate vicinity, wiring them to a central and remote detonator on the Nyx. They hadn't just found a hiding place. They had turned their cage into a weapon. "I know," she replied, her voice calm. "And he will not expect the cage to have teeth." The arrival of the Crimson Legion was not an ambush. It was a pronouncement. One moment, space was empty. The next, it was filled with the silent, terrible majesty of Kalen Vor's fleet. They warped in at the edge of the maw, a perfect crimson-lit formation of battleships and heavy cruisers, with the monstrous blade-like form of the Indomitus at their heart. They did not charge in. Vor was no fool. He sent waves of reconnaissance drones first, swarms of electronic eyes that picked their way through the asteroid field, mapping every shadow, every radiation signature. On the Nyx's bridge, the crew watched as the Vex net tightened around them. "He's found us," the sensor chief reported, his voice tight. "He's mapping our positions, and he's identified the FTL boy." Rostova allowed a grim, humorless smile to touch her lips. "Good," she whispered. The Vex fleet began its advance, a slow, deliberate tightening of the noose. They moved with the cold confidence of an executioner. Vor's voice, a low growl of synthesized bass, suddenly echoed across all Terran channels, a broadcast on an open frequency for all to hear. "Terran Commander, I am Grand Kalen Vor. You have fought with the spirit of a cornered beast. I grant you that. But your den has been found. Surrender now. A swift death is the only mercy I offer." Rostova keyed her own comms. "Grand Kalen," she replied, her voice cool and steady, a stark contrast to his growl. "We are humanity. We do not accept ultimatums, and we do not grant mercy." She cut the channel. "All ships," she commanded, her voice dropping to a battle-ready pitch. "He's coming for the boy. Defend it. Make him believe it is the only thing in the universe that matters. Maelstrom Protocol on my mark." The battle began, not with a grand volley, but with a calculated surgical strike. Vor, having identified the external FTL buoy as the Terran's single greatest vulnerability and only escape route, ordered a flight of long-range torpedoes to strike it from a distance. The wreckers moved, their 7 hulls pivoting in a desperate, synchronized dance to form a protective shield around the buoy. Their point defense cannons lit up the void, weaving a net of flak that destroyed most of the incoming ordnance. But not all. 2 torpedoes struck the T. Retribution. And the destroyer's wounded hull finally gave way, its reactor core tearing a new, brief star in the darkness. 6 ships remained. "He is testing us," Varric grunted, as the Nyx shuddered from a near miss. "Seeing how we'll react, then we will give him the reaction he expects," Rostova said, her eyes locked on the advancing Vex fleet. "Mark." As one, the 6 remaining wrecker ships vented their plasma cores. The maw was lit by a blinding flash of white energy, and the Vex sensors were instantly blinded. In that moment of darkness, the Terran ships fired their rail cannons. A single, brutal volley aimed not to destroy, but to disrupt. The slugs tore into the shields of the Vex forward line, staggering their advance, sowing chaos just as Kalen Vor was committing his forces, Aboard the Indomitus, Vor saw the plasma flare and the subsequent volley. He saw the desperation, the willingness to use their one trick, their one gambit, to protect their only means of escape. He saw exactly what Rostova wanted him to see. Predictable, he sneered to his tactical officer. They are protecting their escape route with their lives. A noble, but futile gesture. All ships, full advance. Ignore the crippled destroyers. Overwhelm and destroy that buoy. Once it is gone, their will shall break. The Crimson Legion surged forward, a tide of crimson steel and focused energy pouring into the heart of the asteroid field, their weapons converging on the single, vital target of the FTL buoy. They flew directly into the center of Rostova's web. Rostova watched them come, her face a mask of iron control. She let them get closer, so close that the hulls of the Vex battleships filled the forward canopy of the Nyx. She waited until the Vex guns began their final firing sequence. Then, with a voice as cold and empty as the void itself, she gave her final order. Activate the scrapyard. A single encrypted signal pulsed from the Nyx. Across the asteroid field, the salvaged impulse engines mounted on a dozen city-sized asteroids ignited simultaneously. There was no sound, only a sudden, terrible change in the celestial mechanics of the maw. The asteroids, no longer passive obstacles, became kinetic weapons of unimaginable power. They did not just move, they converged. A man-made avalanche of rock and iron descending from all angles upon the committed, tightly packed formation of the Crimson Legion. The effect was absolute annihilation. A Vex cruiser, its shields oriented forward, was simply erased as a mountain of nickel iron slammed into its spine at 1,000 kilometers per second. Battleships were crushed, their superstructures groaning and collapsing under impacts they were never designed to withstand. The perfect, disciplined Vex formation dissolved into a maelstrom of collisions, explosion, and pure physical devastation. Kalen Vor, on the bridge of the Indomitus, could only watch in stunned horror as his fleet was murdered by a planetary body. His ship, at the heart of the formation, was struck by 3 smaller asteroids in rapid succession, its shields collapsing, its hull screaming in protest. Alarm shrieked a symphony of silent ruin. Through the chaos and the debris, he saw the Nyx, battered and bleeding, its rail cannons charging for one final shot. Their gazes met across the void, the hunter and the monster, a silent acknowledgement of a battle of wills that had transcended ships and weapons. The Nyx's cannons fired. The twin slugs, guided by a dying ship's last ounce of will, struck the Indomitus directly in its command tower. The bridge of the Vex flagship exploded into vacuum and fire. The reign of the Crimson Legion was over. The silence that followed was more profound than any that had come before. Of the mighty Vex fleet, only drifting, shattered hulks remained. Of the wreckers, only 4 ships were left, including the Nyx. They were barely ships at all now, just collections of systems held together by desperation and the sheer stubbornness of their crews. They hooked their crippled hulls to the FTL buoy, their prize and their salvation. The war was not over. The Vex Imperium, though wounded and shamed, would not die in a day. The journey home would be long and perilous, but something fundamental had shifted in the balance of the galaxy. The news of the Crimson Legion's destruction in the Charybdis Maw would spread, a testament not to Terran technology or numbers, but to their indomitable, unbreakable will. On the scarred and flickering bridge of the Nyx, Fleet Captain Eva Rostova stood before the viewport, watching the last fires of her enemy die out amongst the silent rocks. She had led 36 ships into the dark, and she would lead 4 back. The cost had been immense, a price paid in blood and steel. But it was a price worth paying. Humanity had been given an ultimatum: submit or face annihilation, in the heart of a dead star system, surrounded by the ghosts of her fleet and the wreckage of her enemy. Rostova had delivered their reply.